From recruiting and consulting firm Riderflex, I'm your host, Steve Urban, and here is your Riderflex Podcast episode of the day.
Yep.
Ready to roll?
Ready to roll.
Michele King on the Riderflex Podcast. How you doing, Michele?
I'm doing great today. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. Our friend Heather introduced us. I'm glad you're on the show. I looked you up, studied you, looked at the company, and I thought, oh, yeah, she'll be a great guest. So I appreciate you being here.
Hopefully I am worthy by the end of the interview. Yeah.
Are you in Longmont, Colorado?
We are indeed. Yes.
Hey, you know what? I love Longmont. I think it's a great town.
It is an exploding town right now. It didn't used to be that way 20 years ago, but now it is. The complexion of it has dramatically changed.
Yeah, it's a great town. My partner, my co-founder, Scott, he lives in Broomfield, and I live up in Johnstown near Loveland.
Oh, yeah.
And so when we meet, Longmont's like a very kind of in the middle. And so if we're going to happy hour or dinner, or we need to talk business, like we meet there all the time. And
yeah,
so
it's really grown, and the restaurant base has grown. Of course, now it's a little odd going on right now, but they're really trying hard to drive small business to Longmont.
Now, you're not from Colorado, right? Are you from the East Coast?
I am. I was born and raised in Maryland and lived there until I was 30, and then moved to Colorado.
You know, everybody that's from Baltimore, not everybody, people that grew up in Baltimore, there's this little bit of edge. There's a little like direct communication, very confident, very, there's no hesitation, just a very confident kind of direct communicator. Does that sound right?
That is 110% correct. Yes. I am very to the point. One of our tenets here at the company is, let's just rip the Band-Aid off and get it over with. So if there's a problem, let's not hide the fact that there's this big elephant standing in the room, because guess what? Everybody can see it. In my mind, everybody can see it. So yes, I'm very direct and to the point, and that sort of navigated my career.
It was interesting. I was watching a YouTube clip of you being interviewed by somebody before I actually looked up where you were from. And right away, I'm like, oh, she's from the East Coast. You've been softened a little bit, right? You've been watered down just a tad.
It took about 10 years. I will admit it took about 10 years to get to the point where I'm like, the game plays different here. It's the same game, but in my business, you approach the game a little bit differently here than you do on the East Coast. They're not overly sensitive on the East Coast when it comes to getting deals done. It's like boom, 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 boom. Let's make it happen. Move to the next one.
Right. Totally agree. So, okay, so you grew up there, went to the University of Baltimore. What, majored in business?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Tell me about your family life early on. Mom, dad, siblings, stuff like that.
Yeah. So 4 kids. I'm kind of in the middle. I have a younger sister that's 8 years younger than I am. She's the baby. Older brother's a state trooper. My other brother works for a big food distribution company. My younger sister is a landscape architect designer. And we had a really normal life. We lived in an 800 square foot house with 1 bathroom, 1 window shaker, air conditioner. So when it was hot, which it gets in Maryland, every kid is along the bed. My dad would get out in the morning and, stumble over 4 kids to get to the bathroom, but that was the only air conditioner. And it was great. My dad was a mechanic originally, and then he was a truck driver. And my dad is 82 years old, and he's still driving truck. Wow. And I think my mother likes that a lot.
Oh, so he's overnight for a few nights a week.
No, he's not at his age. So he went back to his native roots, and he's actually hauling for a local farmer. So he's based in Maryland, and he'll take runs to maybe Pennsylvania. So they're about 2 or 3 hours away, and he'll do 1 or 2 of those a day. And it keeps his mental acuity sharp. And my mom was a school bus driver for 35 years. So,
wow. How about that? That? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So they're still doing well.
They're still doing well. And yep, absolutely.
Okay. Very good. Well, so when you went to school, how'd you fall in love with construction? Like walk me through, did you know what you wanted to do? Did you have some sort of plan? Talk to me a little bit about that early early life there?
So I got a great piece of advice for a guy that my dad was working for. He was working at the time for a big trailer leasing company. So big distribution centers, if they need auxiliary tractor and trailers, they would go to companies like this and say, hey, I need 20 tractors and trailers. Additional, I've got more volume, et cetera. My dad worked for that company. And his boss at the time said to me, I couldn't have been 15, 16 years old. His name was Rex, very impressionable in one conversation with me. And he said, you know, Michele, nobody cares where you go to the first 2 years of your college. So go to community college, save yourself a ton of money. My parents had no money, so I was going to college if I could fund it, essentially. So I did that. I went to community college. I transferred to University of Baltimore, which was only a junior, senior college. So everybody's coming in the same boat. And he said, do everything you can possibly do to expand your horizons on career paths, et cetera. So during that time frame, I got a job as a senior in high school because I only had to take one class. All my credits were done. So I worked all day at Coca-Cola Enterprises, which was the North Atlantic regional office for Coca-Cola in the accounting department. Because I thought I'll just be an accountant. I'm good with numbers. Math made sense. I did that for my senior year. And at the end, I thought, this is the worst job on the face of the planet. Why would anybody do this for a living? Like this is, it just is repetitive. And to me, it was repetitive and boring. And once you figured out the problem, you just had to repeat it millions of times over because the transactions were the same. So I got a job at an organization called the Columbia Association. And it was started in Columbia, Maryland by a guy by the name of James Rouse. And James Rouse started the Rouse Company. He built all across the country. What he built notably here in Colorado was the original Park Meadows Mall. So he was a huge developer. And back in the 50s, he acquired an enormous amount of property in Columbia, Maryland. So if you and I worked for him, you would go and buy 10 parcels, I'd buy 10, so on and so forth. And he amassed enough property that he created the community of Columbia, Maryland. And its final build out was about 125,000 residents. And they had individual villages and so on and so forth. And so I went to work for them. And I started working for the aquatics director. And the aquatics director was trying to do construction because nobody else was doing this. Was 30 years ago. And when we were doing that, I was like, well, there's got to be a better way. Like the gal who's actually running the camp program is trying to build a community center. Like none of that made any sense. And I was a kid. So my boss and I went on to create a construction department. And we went on to run it for 10 years. I was with them for 10 years. So we did all sorts of fun projects. I mean, we built rec centers, swimming pools, just all sorts of really fun, cool things. But it was like a government job, right? They were a quasi municipality. So they taxed. If you lived in Columbia, you had like a piggyback tax, and that was our revenue source. And in addition to that, we sold memberships, and it was a great place to learn construction. It would not have been my first pick. It would not have been. I mean, if I had to go back in time and say, if you could do anything, what would you do? I would say, I'd be a surgeon. There's no question. I would have been a surgeon, would have loved it. But you stumble upon, and then all of a sudden, 10 years later, you're still doing the same thing. So at that point, does it make sense for a career change? So moved to Colorado, got a job.
Why?
Just lifestyle. When I left the Columbia Association, I worked for a large builder that was based in Maryland, and I was working in Washington, D.C. So I was living in Maryland. My jobs were all in D.C., and they were tough projects. These were rehabs of existing old apartment buildings. So it was a tough environment. They were always tough neighborhoods. All the job sites were fenced with razor wire. We had guard dogs. I mean, it was just a different place to work. And you do that for a couple of years, especially with the same product. So we were renovating and building apartments. I just found it to be a very boring product to build because I had come from so much diversity of product. This year I'm building a swimming pool. Next year I'm building a rec center. It just didn't lend itself to what I wanted to do. And the lifestyle was really getting tough. Making the commute to DC, if anybody has been to DC, and that Capital Beltway is like driving in LA. So it ages you. But just look for a lifestyle change. Looked around the country, said, great place. At the time, I didn't have kids. Great place to raise kids.
Were you married at the time?
I was.
So you told your husband, you're like, hey, I'm going to quit my job. Let's move to Colorado.
It was actually him at the time. And now this is my now ex-husband, and we have a great relationship. He's a great guy. But he said, I could live anywhere but Maryland. I was like, okay, we talked about everything, right? We talked about how we would raise the children and what it would look like and so on and so forth. And so he really was the catalyst for it. And it was a scary thing for me because granted, I moved out when I was 17. So when I was still in high school, I was like, thanks, I'm good. I'll go now. And I finished high school living, my own apartment. And because I'm like, I could probably figure this out. And but I'd never really moved out of state. I had traveled a lot. So it was a scary move coming to Colorado. And I was here for about a week and just hating it, missing my family.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
missing my friends. I was older, but I was still, it was hard. It was hard to make that change at that life stage. And, but after about a week, I was like, this is a pretty cool place. And by then I had a job. I had flown out, I had interviewed, I already had a job before we moved out.
Okay.
So that, there was security in that regard. And I went in as project manager for a general contractor here. And so that part of my life was fine. But it really opened my eyes to the diversity of the country. Now, I traveled a ton, so I traveled internationally and domestically, but living in another place and working there is very different than working, on the East Coast and, sort of telecommuting to the West Coast. It's totally different. But I loved it. And I worked for the contractor that I got my initial job with for 3 years and said, it's not a good match for me. I had, it was just time. And I said to my ex-husband at the time, we were getting ready to adopt children. We adopted 3 girls from China.
Wow.
My twins are now 19. And my youngest, who is also from China, is 16.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so we had these little twin babies and getting ready to adopt the third one. And I said, I really just don't want to do this job anymore because it was a job.
And what was your husband? What was your husband doing at the time? Was he working?
He was not. He was actually home with the twins.
Okay.
There's no family. There's no, I wasn't a daycare
Right.
kind of gal.
Yeah.
But, somebody needs to make a living.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So he said, just start your own business. I said, I don't think I have the skill set to do that. He's like, you've got to be kidding me. Absolutely, you have the skill set. I said, okay, I've been an estimator. I've been a PM. I know enough about accounting just to be dangerous, but I can certainly read, I can use, read the balance sheet and the P&L and, I can do projections, et cetera. I'd done, a little bit of marketing, some sales. And he said, you've touched everything. Just go do it. And he's really the one that kicked me in the butt and said, just get out there and do it. And so I did. And it was scary because I was the only income. And I was fortunate, maybe it was fortune, maybe it was something else, to find a big contract, 2 big contracts with existing GCs out of Denver. And I basically went to them. This was Rhinotrax is 16 years old. So 16 years ago, I went to them and said, hey, if you're looking for a hired gun PM, I don't need health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. You don't need to put me on payroll, put me on retainer. And I worked with 2 general contractors doing 2 projects that they didn't really have the correct in-house expertise to run.
Okay, let me stop you right there. Now, when you went to those to get those deals, were you still at Alliance and you're kind of like having these conversations on the side trying to line up some deals, or did you just quit and you're like, and there was a week or a month or whatever before you got these contracts? I'm just curious.
Yep, I quit. Okay. I just there was one of those, the straw that breaks the camel's back and just says, okay, today's the day. And so I knew both companies by virtue of just crossing paths, right? This industry is fairly small.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, what am I going to do? And how am I going to do it? And so I just reached out to, guys that I knew. I say guys generically, but, reached out to people and said, hey, what do you have? And so the very first project, which was my first really big corporate win, was a contract to do a renovation in a big freezer for Safeway Corporation down at the distribution center in Denver. And I knew nothing about distribution. I knew nothing about ammonia refrigeration, warehousing. That was a foreign world to me, but I was like, well, that sounds cool. I can probably figure that out, because at that point, I had built multifamily, I had built rec, I had built other sort of commercial spaces, retail space, that sort of thing. So this was, it's like building a, nuclear power plant. There's not a lot of people that build nuclear power plants, but if you get the opportunity to go on one and build one, it's like, well, yeah, let's do it. That'll be fun. So that's how I got those opportunities. And they said, yeah, as a matter of fact, we've got this deal. We don't have the right PM on the deal. And I said, look, I'll work out of my house. You don't owe me an office, et cetera, et cetera. I'll write your contracts. You guys can review them. Your VP of ops can be my boss, and so on and so forth. And so I did that with 2 different companies. And it was extremely lucrative.
Gotcha.
In probably year 2 or 3 of Rhinotrax, there were days I went, I should go back to that retainer scenario. Before you get employees and you get all those other, things that come with really launching a business. I call those the good old days, right?
Why the name Rhinotrax? Where'd that come from?
Good question. So we get asked that all the time, and that's the reason why it's called that. And that actually was the brainchild of my ex-husband. He said, you've got to name it something unusual and unique. I would never name the company after myself. It did, like I would just never do that. And there's some really bad construction company names, like really like, did you think long and hard about that? Like, what's the marketing campaign for that? And that was a name that he had for another business that he never launched, and said, Rhinotrax, that's kind of cool. And I love rhinos. They're unusual. They're strong, but they're agile. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of me. That's kind of who I am. I can relate to that. And boom, we launched with Rhinotrax. And
Awesome.
Another marketing person several years later, she said, best thing you could have ever done. And my ex-husband said to me, once a week, somebody will say, where in the world did you come up with that name?
Right. When you checked,
they'll never forget it.
When you checked for the URL, was Rhinotrax available on GoDaddy or whatever? Or were you immediately? Okay.
It was. Yeah. We secured it immediately and used it ever since.
Good for you. How long did you do this before you had to start hiring people?
I was about a year in. I was managing the contract at the distribution center at the meat freezer for Safeway, and the general contractor that I was under retainer with, unfortunately, they had a lot going on internally, and I wasn't involved in any of that because I'm working out of my house. The company started going under. So I was having direct communication with the director of construction for Safeway out of California. And he called me up one day, Arnie Collins, just gave me my big break, and love him to death for it. And he said, what's going on? I said, I have a fiduciary obligation to these guys. I'm under contract with them. So, and I didn't really have a lot of the internal knowing on of what was going on. So I knew subs weren't getting paid because I'm hearing it in the field. I just knew things were going on. And so he flew out, figured it out in 20 minutes, what was going on. And so he terminated their contract and hired Rhinotrax. So this was now officially Rhinotrax's first construction project, to the tune of about $2.5 million. And I had no staff. So they were going under, they were letting people go and so on and so forth. So I ended up hiring the superintendent that had been the superintendent, hired the carpenter, so on and so forth, bought some trucks from those guys, that sort of thing.
Now, how did you have the capital to do that when you had to buy all this stuff? How did you do? Yeah.
So I started the company quite literally. I cashed in $40,000 in my 401k that I had from a prior, and I bought a computer. I bought folding tables at Home Depot. And you can talk to my staff who's still with me now. They're like, yeah, we worked on those things for like 5 years. I wouldn't want to buy furniture. I was like, what's wrong with the folding table? They're like, can we really get real furniture? I said, eventually I said, yes, except we got new used furniture to us. Cause I was like, furniture's furniture. That stuff doesn't make any difference to me. So, so I had enough money, and I made some mistakes. I didn't want to have a lot of debt. I was not risk adverse, but I also was very fiscally responsible. So, I paid cash for some vehicles. I kind of went through some money, wanting the feeling that, the bank's not going to come knocking, in 6 months because there's a problem, or I've got a cash flow problem, or what have you. And it all miraculously worked out. We never had a cash flow problem.
Great.
And the business just started to launch itself. And so it ended up working out.
That contract, that big contract, when you had to hire those people, that was really a huge kind of turning point for the company right there.
It was. And it was a nerve-wracking point because that Safeway Corporation bonded every project less than 50,000. I couldn't even spell bonding at the time. I mean, bonding is like getting credit when you're 17. It's like, please, can I get a credit card? Yes, you can get $200, or whatever it is that the bank is willing to secure for you. And so bonding is very much the same way as a business owner in the construction industry. You're basically saying, hey, do you trust in me to make sure I deliver on these contracts? Because if I don't, you've got to pay the piper and finish these deals. And that was a really hard thing to get when I first started, because I had no history. I had history individually, but the corporation did not. So I was nervous when I said yes. I hung up the phone. I'm thinking to myself, how in the world am I going to pull this off? Because I don't know. I just said yes and think I can figure that out. And I think he knew. I think he knew that I didn't have the capacity to get the bonding at the time. He never requested a bond. Which was, his discretion to do. He was the director of construction. And he was just a really great mentor to me. And he really, there were times in our relationship, we're doing a project right now for Safeway in California. So they've just have been a client forever. And I asked him probably 5 or 6 years into it, Arnie, shouldn't we be building stores or doing store renovation? Correct? There's a whole nother side beyond distribution. He said, nah. I said, really? Why not? He said, we'll kill you. Schedules are ridiculous. And he said, I will guarantee you'll never make as much money over there. And he was right.
Wow. Now, during this time, super stressful time for you, but great for the business. All of a sudden you have employees, the business is growing. What was happening with your personal life at the time? I'm just wondering about the timeline, because you mentioned the ex-husband a few times, plus you adopted some kids. So you were learning how to be a mom. You had brand new kids that you just adopted. All of a sudden your business is growing. Are you also going through changes in your personal life? Is that when I'm just curious if you're dealing with all this at the same time?
Absolutely. It started out as like a bucket, and then it quickly moved to a 55-gallon drum worth of stuff, So I started the company at the house, and I moved to the basement, and I had employees coming to the basement. We were working out of the basement of my house. Wow. My ex-husband at the time had started another job or started another business. He was a serial entrepreneur. Okay. And I had a nanny, Chinese nanny. Actually, I'm super proud of that, because she only spoke Chinese to the kids when they were babies. Now, as teenagers, they could care less about it. I'm like, this could be a great skill 20 years from now. And so I could hear the pitter patter of little feet upstairs, and that filled my cup up. And I learned very early on, in order to be successful in business, you have to have an internal switch that says, I am laser focused and dedicated at work, but I'm also laser focused and dedicated when I'm at home. And those two, when they start to get muddied, is when things really start to become stressful, I think. So you carry over what you had from before, from the day, and it ruins what should be this incredible thing with all these great kids and so on and so forth. So I learned that really quickly, and I'm really good at it. I practice it all the time. And my husband now, who works with me now, he's our VP of Ops, says, done, work's over. I said, you're right. Sometimes I need a reminder.
Was he an employee? What was he an employee?
Yes.
He was an employee.
No, he was not an employee. He came. I mean, we got together, and then he said, he's been in construction for 40 years.
Okay.
I could go work somewhere else. I'm like, well, why would you work somewhere else? Let's just work together. So we are literally together 24/7. We've been together for 10 years. Love of my life. And he fills my cup up, but he also challenges me. If people think I'm East Coast, I'm like, oh, you haven't met my husband, because he's real East Coast.
Wow. He's got your same speed and personality?
He probably clicks along a little faster than I do.
Wow. Okay.
So it's an intense environment during the day, but we really figured out a good balance to play well. Like when we play golf together every weekend, we never talk about work there. We're raising, we have a great relationship, basically a 3-parent relationship now, raising these kids. 2 of my kids have special needs. So they have more, my 19-year-olds, they're still in high school and so on and so forth. And they need a little bit more care and attention. And everybody just pitches in and says, yep, I'll take this kid here, because the chances of them driving are probably not reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah. So we
Wow.
just
Wow.
make it work. We make it work. Yeah.
Your speed and personality, I guess you've learned over time when you're meeting with somebody from Colorado or somebody that moves a little slower. I'm just guessing you've learned how to dial your style to the client you're talking to across the table. I'm just assuming.
Yeah, it is interesting. I have been told that I'm a big personality or I'm intense. Part
Hmm.
of it is because I've already got it worked out in my brain. And so
Hmm.
I'm just delivering data at the same speed that I want to receive data. So that took a long time, and I'm not particularly great at it. I will say we've lost deals because of my personality.
Yeah.
That's okay. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not for everybody, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But it does take it takes a conscious effort on my part
Right.
to really slow it down. That's a thing I work on all the time. So
Hmm.
even after being in this market for almost 20 years, it's really difficult. The advantage to the type of business that I've built at Rhinotrax is most of our clients are big corporate. So, when I'm
Okay.
dealing with Safeway, they're in California, or if I'm dealing with United Airlines, they're based in Chicago or what
Yeah.
have you, and they do run at that speed.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it's easier to have that level of communication. But when we do have born and bred, everybody's here, and I'm talking the whole team, the clients from here, the design teams from here, the engineers are from here. um, I know when to step back and give it to a manager
Yeah.
and just say, hey, you've got to run this deal.
That's
um,
so, yeah, that's a great tip for the listeners. Scott and I are the same at Riderflex at our recruiting firm. My style is much like yours. I'm a pretty intense guy. And so there are clients where Scott will call me and he'll go, hey, yeah, you probably don't need to come to this meeting. I'll take care of it.
mhm. Absolutely. Well, and to be perfectly honest, there's some deals I can't sell. Even
Yeah.
with my depth of knowledge, et cetera, things are changing now. Being a female in construction was never an issue for me. It was never an issue for me because I always wanted to, what are you doing? How did you do it? Can you teach me that? And
Mhm.
everybody loves to teach their skill sets. And so I was a constant sponge through my entire career. My husband, there are deals that only he can sell.
Mhm.
He's got the
Mhm.
right look.
Mhm.
He's,
Mhm.
it's this guy exchange.
Mhm.
And I'm okay with that. I don't have to
Yeah.
sell every deal.
Yeah.
It's okay. We are plenty successful with me not having to, slay every single dragon. And that's okay. And that's
What's
okay
it
with me.
what's it been like being a woman in a male dominated industry? I mean, I'm assuming over the years you've dealt with some assholes or I don't know,
Oh
sexual
yeah.
harassment or just people just, you know, talk to me a little bit about what it's been like for you.
I'm pretty direct. Whenever I encounter somebody like that, now my husband's very protective of me, right? So he's ready to go out and slay those dragons. But in my career, I think because if I was vulnerable in the sense of, hey, I don't know what you're doing, I legitimately said, can you teach me that? And you just garner a lot of respect. I legitimately wanted to know what the plumber was doing. I wanted to know what the HVAC guy was doing. How was the electrician doing his work?
Hmm.
And that's sort of one of my keys of advice for young people. It's like, go out and learn as much as you possibly can, because all of that comes back to you.
Hmm.
Yeah, were there assholes? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely there were. I'm not going to change them. That's the reality of it. I can get up on a soapbox and so on and so forth, but I'm not going to change somebody that's been in the business for 45 years and he's pushing 70 years old and he's got a very clear thought on where women should be in the office and why am I not doing admin. Yeah, I never let that chafe me. And very, very, I mean, I can count on one hand and probably less than two fingers the amount of awkward interactions that I have
Okay.
had in my entire
Oh,
career. And
good.
I've been everywhere in this
Yeah.
business. I've been in the
Hmm.
field for a certain period of time, in the office, in front of clients, in front of subs, all of that sort of thing over 30 years. And I think most I'll say men in this industry, because it's, there's a lot of women PMs now, which I think is awesome.
Okay.
That's growing. And I think that's fantastic. I think most men, once they realize you have intellect, you understand what's going on. And if you don't, you say, just explain that to me, because I've not heard that
Hmm.
term before or whatever. It levels the playing field right out.
Good. Yeah,
So
good.
young women, I always say, you got to know your business. And I think that's
Hmm.
true of any business, but in construction, it's really true because there's some rough characters in this business.
Yeah, I bet there is.
Yeah.
Why don't you do this real quick? Do the elevator pitch, 3-minute Rhinotrax overview, real quick, just for the listeners. Tell us.
Okay. So it's probably not 3 minutes because this is the
Okay.
part that I'm really bad about. So Rhinotrax Construction, we founded ourselves based on a simple core ethic. Just going to do the right thing. It's how we're going to deliver the product to you. That's how we're going to treat ourselves. It's how we're going to treat our subcontractors, et cetera. If it's on the plans and we missed it, we own it. That's who we are. If it's not on the plans and you want it, that's an additional cost. We are not change order kings. We want to deliver good product to you. We work in the aerospace industry, transportation industry, distribution, manufacturing, higher ed, and office. So we kind of run the full breadth of product. Rhinotrax likes weird, unusual, funky projects. If you've got a project in a facility that's too small for the big boys, too complicated for most, as far as much smaller contractors, we are that contractor. We love logistically challenging projects. We've done projects, many huge win projects for us were not necessarily big dollar projects, but they were projects that really drove us to solving the problem for the client so that we can stay out of their way and they can continue to make money. That's what we do.
How many employees?
We on average, we're down now, but we're on average between 12 and 15.
Okay.
We've been there the whole time. We're down now a little bit because of COVID. There's some buildings that got shut down. And so we haven't been able to get back in. It's just now starting to get to the point where it's getting back to normal, but 12 to 15, it's perfect. I don't have big aspirations to increase, the amount of employees and or really the revenue, to be honest with you. We have a core group of clients that we love. They appreciate us. They get the value that we bring to them. And we're just in a really comfortable place. And we've been there for a long, long time. We've been there through the downs of 2008, 9, and 10. Rhinotrax doubled its volume during that time frame. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And we just maintain those relationships. My clients, our clients, they're friends. It's like, let's go have a beer together. Now, we're friends at a corporate level, right? We're not going to hang out every Friday night. But if, I fly to California on a deal, the director of construction out there, we're going to go get a beer and have lunch together. And that's just, that's the way I like doing business. It's contracts are always in place. All of those legality things are always in place, but it's good to get conversational with your clients. They appreciate it.
I don't know about you, but I've missed doing that with our clients. I've missed getting together with them in person with clients. In fact, after this interview, Scott and I are actually driving down to Denver to have lunch with a client. And then Scott and I are probably going to do happy hour after. And I was telling him last night, I'm like, man, when's the last time we had beers together, like in person? Like it's been, we didn't even know. And so today I'm actually going to go out and see human beings and it's going to be great. So if you signed 2 new contracts that were huge, that required you to hire 10 more people, would you pass on it?
Nope.
You'd take it.
I'd take it. Absolutely.
You'd take it.
Absolutely. Just like if I had an opportunity, which we did, 2 or 3 years ago, I got a call from a client that said, hey, can you go to Arizona and do a separation in a manufacturing plant from the warehouse? Yep. Hang up the phone. I said, oh man, I got to get my license down there. I don't have insurance down there. But it's great client. And I said, absolutely, I'm going. And that's what took us to California. That's what took us to Washington State. So we will travel for the right client. And that's all a challenge. That's what keeps the business fresh. It's a different business model when you start to travel, right? When you stay home and you're local and you can touch everything. And I liked that for a long time, because if something happened, I could get there. I could get there in 2 hours and there's no problem that can't be solved, short of somebody being hurt. And knock on wood, right? We've always been super safe, but short of that, any problem can be solved. It's just time and money.
One of the things you've mentioned several times in this interview is I just say yes and then hang up the phone and figure it out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you want to grow your business, I don't know if that quote is from Mark Cuban or I don't know, somebody famous has often said, look, if you're an entrepreneur, just say yes, hang up the phone, figure it out. Just figure it
Absolutely.
out. Yeah, if you want
Well,
to
you
grow
got
your
to have
business.
smart people, right? So if you're an
Yeah.
entrepreneur and you start a business, you better have the best banker, best insurance agent, in my case, the best bonding agent, and the best attorney.
Yeah.
Because you hope you never need some of those people. But if
Yeah.
you
But you,
need them,
yeah.
they have to be in your arsenal, and they've got to
Mhm.
know who you are. So I've given lots of talks about, small business and, really what's the key, and financing is a big deal, right? And so
Mhm.
you better have the best bank, and they better know who you are, because when times are bad, the ones who they know, those are the first conversations that they're having.
Well,
And PPP is a prime example. We applied for PPP on a Monday. We had the loan on a Tuesday. The money was in the bank on Thursday.
nice.
If I didn't
Nice.
know my banker, I'm probably not going to have that opportunity to have that quick transaction. And so I think that's critical. You just
You
have to have a good team.
you've mentioned the importance of relationships several times
Oh, yeah.
during this interview. It really is critical. So many people kind of miss that.
Mhm.
They're super smart, so maybe they're super high IQ, or they invented a product or whatever. That's all great, but if you don't have the people skills to manage relationships, it's probably going nowhere for you.
I 100% agree. Every business transaction in my type of business um, is all about the relationship. Do they trust you?
Hmm.
Do they like you?
Hmm.
Do they think they want to work with you for however long this project is going to be? And so
Right.
if you create an environment where you're truly wanting to know that person. Now, do I love every single person that we work with all the
R-
time? Yeah.
No, no,
No.
no, no.
Can we get through any deal? Absolutely. Because I truly believe, even with somebody that's oppositional on the other side, there's no problem that can't be solved. There's no problem that can't be solved. And
Mm-hmm.
so people that get involved in big litigation and all that kind of stuff, I'm like, surely there's a way to solve this problem. And I'm
Hmm.
forever the optimist. I'm always an optimist. It's easier to live my life that way. I'm a realist, but I'm also very much an optimist.
Is your personality from your dad's style or your mom's? I'm just
My
curious.
dad,
Yeah.
my
Okay.
dad, my mom is extremely, and I would say painfully shy. This
Really
this doing this
interesting.
exchange, it would tear her up for weeks in advance, and during it she probably may not get through it. But my dad is he's a super hard worker. Like I said, he's 82. He's still working. He just to get up, get it done, tell people what you're going to do, and do what you say. And that's
Love it.
how I was raised, and that's the way I run the company. We're not going to not deliver on a promise. And if
Love it.
I made a promise, and my staff is the same way. So that's another thing that kind of keeps us a little smaller. It's hard to find those folks that walk to the beat of the same drum.
Right.
You can find super duper smart people, but you have to believe it.
Hmm.
You have to feel it in your core, and you can't just do it at work. So if you are authentically that way in your personal life, then it's easy to be that way in business, because it's just who you are. So
Hmm.
when you have somebody that flip flops like that, they probably are not a good match for Rhinotrax, because we just want to do a good job. We want to do a good
Yep.
job. We want to make our clients happy, and we want to make money. I mean, that's
Isn't
what
it
it's about.
is isn't it interesting? When we started our recruiting firm, we have a few special things we do that are a little bit different than other recruiting firms, but really it's, we're all placing talent, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things we say all the time is just do a good job.
Mhm.
Just do what you said you were going to do, deliver on time, communicate well. Like, it's not rocket science.
It's
Just
not. You're correct. Even in what we're doing, I often tell interview candidates, I said, look, what we do for a living, we are not curing cancer. We're
right.
just building stuff, right? Now it's
Yep.
complicated. There's lots of parts and pieces. There's lots of outside influence with, municipalities and subcontractors and suppliers and such. But at the end of the day, it's one step at a time. So we kind of we adopted, formalized sort of our code of ethics from a
Mm,
book that was written by James Owen, and it was Cowboy Ethics. And if you
okay.
haven't had a chance to read the book, it's fantastic. And it's a short read, and it's beautifully illustrated. And we actually have it up on the wall in our office. So anybody who comes in to
Nice.
interview for Rhinotrax or whatever looks at the wall and says, that's who it is. And it's things like, do what you say you're going to do, never break a
Right.
promise, ride for the brand, all of those things. And
Mhm.
if you do that for your family and you do that in your work life, I think life's a whole lot easier.
Totally
Um,
agree. Totally agree.
yeah.
As we move towards kind of the last quarter of the interview here, let me ask you a few more questions.
Sure.
What advice would you give to an aspiring entrepreneur that was in your situation, just like you were at when you were working at Alliance and you're like, this is not really a good fit for me. And your ex-husband's saying, start your own business, and you're laying in bed and you're thinking about it for a few weeks. You know, man, should I start my own business? There's other people listening to this episode, probably in the same situation. What would you tell them today based on what you know?
Don't doubt your skill set.
Hmm.
You know more than you are thinking that you know right now. Don't doubt your skill set. If you have been in the industry long enough and you've touched enough components of an operating business, don't doubt it. I don't have to be the CFO, but I do have to know how to read my financials and so on and so forth. And that's a skill set you can get if it's not one that's sharp. So I think the biggest detriment for entrepreneurs is just not starting. And I think they don't get started because they get the analysis paralysis. But what if? But what if? There's tons of what ifs. You have 22 what ifs. I'll have 22 today. Making that first step is always the hardest step, no matter what you're doing. And it's amazing. It's amazing what you can learn from others and what people will give you for free. They give their knowledge for free, and all you have to do is ask for it. And so that's probably my key advice. I went to Johns Hopkins, and I have an MBA and so on and so forth. And that sort of prepped me, but what it really prepped me for was use my resources really well. And when you don't know something, go find out. Have someone else teach you. And it's a lifelong learning process for me. If I don't learn something new during the course of the day, I'm not doing it right. I'm not digging deep enough.
I like that. How about this? How about first time CEO advice? They've never been captain. Somebody started a business and they signed a big contract, and boom, all of a sudden they have 10 or 15 employees and they're trying to learn how to be a CEO.
It's lonely at the top. It's very lonely at the top. And if you're the type of personality that delegates but does not follow up, you're going to be a short-term CEO, because that's critical, right? I can delegate all day long, but if I don't follow up and make sure it got executed, then there's an issue. Now, certain staff members you have to follow up more with, et cetera, but it's real lonely there. And one of the things I learned early on was at the end of the day, you have to make decisions. And ultimately, to give a kind of a football scenario, I'm just trying to get to the end zone. So if I do a lateral play, it's okay. If I go back a little bit, it's okay. But ultimately, the goal is to get to the end zone. So if I run down the field like this and eventually I get to the end zone, that's a win. And it doesn't matter what it looked like and how smelly it was or how damaged we got in the process, it was a win. And I think CEOs get stuck, new CEOs get stuck in, my website needs to be perfect. No, just launch it. Launch it. I mean, I'm on a payroll platform. They change their website, I don't know, every time I log on. It's a different, look and feel. Don't get stuck in that. Launch it, get moving. You have a good idea, get moving with it. And that's probably my biggest advice. And try to find a good third party outside of your spouse, because this is where pressure gets caused, to discuss what's going on. So if it's your business and your spouse is doing something else or what have you, find a mentor, hire a coach. I had a couple of coaches when I first started, because I didn't want my spouse to fix me. I just wanted to run through 22 concepts at my rapid pace and have them listen, because I can work it out as I'm talking. That's generally how my brain works. So if you don't have a confidant like that, it's really important. It's really important. Get involved. I was a part of Vistage group. And Vistage was a great place to be able to sit around a table with people that owned all types of companies. And what you find very quickly is everybody's struggling with the same thing. Everybody's struggling with HR. Just the repeat of what the issues were from CEOs that had, companies of my size, smaller companies, much bigger companies. It resonated across every single person in that room. So I think that is, do it early. Do it early, because it gets overwhelming.
It truly does. Two more questions, the final questions here. If you had to, knowing what you know now, if you could call the 17-year-old girl that was packing up her stuff at her parents' house before she moved out and tell her anything, What would you tell her today, knowing what you know?
Um, I would have told her to take a little bit more risk earlier.
Mm.
I would have told her to take more risk. I was very linear. I was done with my MBA by the time I was 24, 25. I mean, I just was a machine and went right through. Benefit to that, all done, right? Got the degree,
Mhm.
so on and
Mhm.
so forth. I wished I had taken the opportunity to expand my horizons beyond just what was my linear game plan at the time. I'm happy that I did it now because it's done. I wish I had traveled Europe. I just wished I'd had other life experiences that I didn't have until I was older, which was fine. I could afford to do it nicer then, right? But
Right.
when it came to my career path, I may not have stayed in construction, right? I may have been jazzed by something else, and I didn't really give myself that opportunity. So I always tell young people, do lots of things, because the thing that resonates with you is what you're going to enjoy, and then it's no longer a job, right? That's the famous saying, right? Do what you enjoy, and it's not really a job, and that's true. I still love this 30 years later, but there were times that I didn't. And there were times I look back and I'm like, man, if I could have done anything else, this wouldn't have been what I picked. But if you do get inspired early on, learn everything you can possibly learn about that industry, even when you're young. It really helps chart a big course for you.
Very good. Last question. If I asked you to define your core purpose in life
Mhm.
in a sentence or two, but I wanted you to separate family. So let's set your husband and children aside. That's kind of a
Mhm.
different thing. So beyond your immediate family, how would you define Michelle's core purpose?
My core purpose, I think, is to deliver what I promised. And that's true to my children. It's true to my husband. It's true to my family, my extended family. It's true to my staff. That's my core purpose. So I wake up every day, and if I've made a commitment, yeah, I'm going to honor it. And it doesn't really matter what it is. I want to help people be successful, and I think in doing that, I'm also showing them a way to be successful that doesn't add all the extra pressures of life on top of you by, half truths or whatever the case may be. Being authentic to yourself and delivering what you promised every single day. And it could be, yes, I'm going to make dinner tonight, or whatever it is. And I think people use a lot of excuses. And my
Mhm.
core purpose is to be happy, and for my family to be happy. And they are happy when we all deliver on our promises, right?
Love it. Love it. Perfect. I'm really glad you shared that. Great way to wrap up the podcast. I am a huge believer in doing what you said you would do, all the way down to just small stuff.
Yeah.
If I say, "Hey, I'm going to send you that email tomorrow," I do. If I say, "Hey, we're going to meet for dinner at 6 p.m.," I'm there at 6 p.m.
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
and that's just the way I've always lived my life. And so many people I meet are just not like that. There's casually, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot." And I always challenge people. I say, why don't you just count how many times you have to say you're sorry this week? Because
Right.
that's an indication of you not delivering on what you said you would do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too, I want to be authentic with you, and I want to create, if I care about you, whether you're a client or whatever the level of the care is, right? I really want to know who you are. And
Mhm.
so I want you to feel the same way back to me. And the only way we can make that happen is if we continually deliver on the promises. Because when you don't, it's kind of like, I don't have time for you then. That's
Right.
what you're saying. You're saying that your time is more valuable than my time. And I think it's all
Right.
just the same time. So
Very good. Michelle, thank you so much for being on the Riderflex podcast. I really appreciate it.
absolutely. Absolutely.
If you think today's tip or guest interview can help someone you know, please share this with them. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. The Riderflex podcast features entrepreneurs, business executives, and the stories behind how they got there, as well as daily tips on career advice and job interviewing. You can visit riderflex.com to learn more about us and get information and pricing on the recruiting and consulting services we provide. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.